In this video, I'm going to give you an overview of Project Lombok. So one of the problems with the Java programming language is it's often criticized for having too much ceremonial code. For example, always having to write getters and setters. Other languages such as Groovy automatically provide those at runtime for us. They're like self-generated. But in Java, you don't have that. You still have to manually write them. A lot of IDEs will self-generate them for you. You can hit a couple of keystrokes and have them automatically generated for a project. The purpose of Project Lombok is to provide annotation to help eliminate a lot of the ceremonial code. So, for example, using the annotation getter will generate getters for a Pojo, while using setter will also generate corresponding setters. So, using Project Lombok is going to save you a lot of time and give you cleaner looking code. I personally use Lombok all the time. It is one of my go-tos in my toolbox, and you will see me using it more in the course. That's why I'm introducing it at an early stage in the course, because I do want to be utilizing it. This has really become a best practice in developing Java and Spring code. So a little bit about the history. It was started by Reiner, and I'm not going to try that last name. He is at Surreal on Twitter and a role spiker somewhere before 2019. They chose Lombok. They believe it is an island in Indonesia next to the island of Java. It is also Indonesian for chili. So if you look at their website, they do have a tagline of spicing up your Java, which I found a fun little tagline. Now, the way Project Lombok works is it hooks into an annotation processor API. What happens is AST, raw source code, is passed into Lombok for code generation before the Java compilation continues. Thus, the compiled Java code comes out as compiled. We're not using a reflection or anything like that. It does get compiled ahead of time, so everything that Lombok is making is compiled Java code. So you don't have any type of performance using Lombok. Obviously, in compile, there is a step for Lombok, but that is only at compile time. At runtime, you don't have to worry about any type of performance penalty because this is generated code that gets compiled to Java bytecode. So, for example, you can look into the class and see the depiled class. You can actually see what Lombok generated. And if you ever need to override something, let's say you have a Pojo with 6 setters on it and you have some type of custom action, just write the setter. Lombok will skip over the generation of that. So, very simple. It's nice to use. It gets out of your way when you need it to, and it's there when you need it. Now, Project Lombok and IDEs, the compiled code is a change. The source files do not. So some IDEs can get confused by this, especially older IDEs. Newer IDEs, typically, they do have a plugin that allows it to work with it. So what you'll see is happening is if things aren't configured right, if you're generating getters and setters, the IDE will think that they're not there, but they actually are there on the compiled code. So make sure if you're using something other than IntelliJ, IntelliJ does have support built in by default now. That was, I think it was 2020.3 that IntelliJ started including the Lombok plugin by default. If not, look for the plugin. But all the major IDEs do have plugins that allow the IDE to work properly with the Lombok generated code. Now, some of the features, we're going to go through some of the things that Lombok can do. You can use val to declare a final local variable, where var will create a mutable variable. We mentioned getters and setters. Those are pretty straightforward. They will create getters and setters for all properties. ToString is a very nice implementation. This generates your class name and then the properties of the field. So it does do a really nice job of creating a ToString for your classes. There is an optional parameter to include field names and then also another parameter to call the super ToString method. Equals and hash code. This generates an implementation of the equals and hash code. By default, it will use all non-static, non-transient properties. And you can also exclude properties. So when we get into JPA, that can be important because you could get into circular references, which it does not very happy about at all. Now, you can generate a no args constructor. So this will generate a default no args constructor, and this will cause a compiler error if you do have final fields. You can optionally force it and initialize final fields. Probably not a good idea, though. Then you can do required args constructor. So this is really one of my go-tos, especially for dependency injection. If you declare a property Let's say you're injecting a service, you declare that private final. Lombok with the required args constructor will automatically generate that. So if you have 3 dependencies being injected, mark them as final. You don't have to create the constructor. Lombok will do that with an annotation. Data is a nice Lombok annotation. For POJOs, you see this used frequently. At data will combine getter, setter, toString, equals, and hash code, and required args constructor. So you get the one annotation, and then it brings in 5 more. So that is a nice shortcut for working with POJOs. You also have value. This is basically the immutable variant of data. Sometimes you do have to use this, and it is nice to have there. Non-null, so this requires a method or constructor to throw a null pointer exception if you pass in a null value. Builder is one of my favorite Lombok annotations. This creates a builder pattern. I've always liked working with a builder pattern, but if you have to hand code a builder pattern, it's a lot of ceremonial code that you're making. So having a builder annotation is a really nice thing to have on your models and your domain classes. Really saves you a lot of time there. At sneaky throws, this will throw checked exceptions without having to do a throws clause. This can be nice to use at times. And then you also have synchronize. This is a safer implementation of Java synchronize. And then finally, we have at log. This creates a Java util logger. Generally, these are considered awful. Spring Framework itself does use SLF for J, so this will create a SLF for J logger. And remember, that is a facade for a logging framework. And typically, Spring Boot is configured with SLF for J, and then under the cover, Spring Boot is going to use logback. So we do use SLF for J facade for the logging inside of Spring Boot applications, and then unless you override it, you will be using Lombok. So coming up in the course, we will start exploring these features of Lombok. We're going to be looking at it in this section of the course. We'll be setting up some POJOs and exploring the annotations. And then throughout the course, we will be continuing to use Project Lombok.